Hello, everyone, and welcome to Your Cup of Joy. I'm your host, Ariana Joy Christie, and I am so glad that you are here. This is a space to inspire, to learn, to grow, and to challenge. Get ready to fill your cup and spread a little joy along the way.
Okay, Eve Rodsky, principal of Fair Play Policy Institute, author, activist, and motivational speaker. Welcome to Your Cup of Joy.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, I'm so happy that you're here. I actually am a big fan, and I was recommended your Fair Play cards by my therapist actually a while ago. And I'm just so intrigued by all of the research that showcases in your books. And I want to start by sharing with the listeners by giving the origin story of fair play, because I think it really showcases the whole purpose of fair play. And I think it's really relatable to so many. So, Eve, can you tell us about the blueberries?
Absolutely. And thank you for acknowledging all the research that has gone into this. Because I was actually just on grand rounds with USC. We were presenting a new study that we have to the doctors there. So that was really fun.
Oh, amazing.
But this didn't start off that way. There was no institute. There was no research, I think, as you've talked about in different episodes. I mean, this is all personal, right? The personal is the political. And for me, research is me search. So this process of what became of my career, which is what I call myself an expert on the gender division of labor, that didn't come about overnight. It wasn't on my third grade. What do you want to be when you grow up bored? It did not say expert on the gender division of labor. I didn't say that I wanted to be an expert on the gender division of labor when I was in law school. In fact, I thought I'd be a senator from New York and a Nick City dancer at the same time and president of the United States. I came of age in my career in 2000s when we were sort of the first wave of feminists after our parents told us that the road was clear and paved for us. So I believed a lot of those lies that you could have it all. Mm-hmm. And then if I was believing that I could smash all these glass ceilings and be president and a senator, and that was sort of my thought process in 2000. If you cut to 10 years later, what I could say to you is the only thing that I was smashing was definitely not glass ceilings. It was, like peas. Ari, for my toddler, Zach, while I was breastfeeding a newborn baby, barely holding on to my job in a workplace with a hostile manager who told me that if I wanted to breastfeed, it would have to be in a broom closet and I'd have to bring a battery pack.
Yeah.
And at the same time, that was the time when Seth decided to send me a text that you're talking about. And that text just said, I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries. And when I received the I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries text, I think it's important for your listeners to help, picture the scene. I had a breast pump and a diaper bag on the passenger seat of my car. I had gifts for a newborn baby to return in the backseat of my car. I had a client contract in my lap. So I was trying to, like I said, hold on to my job.
Yeah.
I was racing to pick up a toddler from a toddler transition program that in America costs our entire salaries and lasts like 15 minutes. So I think being abandoned by my workplace, by my dreams of what I thought my life was going to look like, ultimately led to this last abandonment of my partner, who I thought was supposed to be a feminist, or at least somebody who cared about my well-being. And in fact, I found myself believing that I was just the fulfiller of his smoothie needs. And in another fact that I wish I had known at the time was that as I was in the car receiving this text message and crying in shame that my marriage was not what I thought it was going to be, I just wish I had had the statistic that 2/3 or more of what it takes to run a household and a family falls on women. Yep. I think if I knew that statistic, then it wouldn't have felt so shameful to me, like it was my personal failing. And that is why that text message sort of changed my life, because I decided at that moment I was going to really try to figure out what was happening to me.
Yeah. And I think that's so relatable because for me, like hearing that statistic from you is almost validating to know like, okay, it's not me. Like
It's not
I'm not
you.
the issue. I'm not the reason that I'm failing. Like the reason that I'm failing is because there's too much on my plate. It's
Right.
impossible. I can never do it all. And I often reflect back to my like early postpartum days where I think before we had kids, my partner and I had pretty balanced household, probably not
Right.
equally, but
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
were pretty good at he respected my work, I respected his, and we both contributed to the household. And then when we had kids, I was home with the babies because I was breastfeeding and I birthed them and your body is healing and you can't really walk right away always and all of those things. So naturally, without communication, I just took on more of the
Yeah.
household duties. I cooked the meals, I cleaned up, I took care of the babies because they were attached to my boobs most of the time. And I think then all of a sudden, when I decided, okay, I'm going to go back to work, that didn't stop. It was almost like a natural progression that shouldn't be natural, that I just continued on doing those things while also taking on my full-time job again. And I think it just happens without us even noticing. What can we do about this? How can we fix this? It's so frustrating. And I think it happens to so
Yeah.
many people.
Well, I think it happens because for two really important reasons. One is because we use these really, really toxic words. When I asked, thousands of couples, how are they going to handle the division of labor in their marriage after a child comes along? The three most toxic words people can say is, we're going to figure it out.
Mm,
Nobody figures anything out.
you don't. Yeah.
When you say that, what that means is, okay, I'm not going to use structured decision making tools for my home organization. I'm going to use assumptions based on, outdated modes of maybe of what my partner's family did or what my family did.
Hmm.
That is not a way that anybody wants to start off anything. So that's number one. People use this "we're going to figure it out" mentality, and it's just horrifically toxic. And then number two is what I just alluded to, which is that zero people, 0.00% of people in my research until Fair Play came along were viewing their homes as an organization.
Yeah.
And if anybody takes away anything from this episode, I hope it's this: the home is your most important organization. And the good news about that is that we have 50 years of organizational management data of what shows what a successful organization is.
Hmm.
And so what I was able to do, because that's actually my day job, I work for families that look like the HBO show Succession, and your listeners should feel bad for me. But what I do for those families as a lawyer is I bring grace and humor and generosity to these very complex organizational decisions. So I remember after the Blueberries days, when I was trying to understand what was happening to me, I also had a really interesting and I think unique perspective that was not a therapist perspective, which I appreciated. And that's why, again, your therapist gave you the cards because we work very closely with
Hmm.
therapists. But I look at the world as a lawyer. And so what I was looking for was not someone to tell me to use I statements in communication because I tried that. And what that ended up being was, yes, I fucking hate you, Seth, right? That's what it became.
Yeah.
So what I needed was behavior change.
Hmm.
And typically in societies, if you want to design behavior, you're looking at the law. So it is as nice as it would be to communicate via text to every driver every day. I would like for you to stop at red lights. Um, Typically, the way we do that and we organize behaviors to get people to stop at red lights is we pass laws. So that's my day job is I use these governance documents, right? They're called bylaws. They're written in many different ways, and we create laws and systems for family organizations. So when I was looking for something that didn't exist in 2011 during my Blueberries breakdown for how I could start to change things in my own family, and it could have been easily what other women were saying. The other three words that I heard a lot, which was that their lives, women's lives were much better when they had three words: court ordered custody. I was thinking, what is the middle ground? Can I stay in this marriage and actually have some time back, some ownership from my partner, and I knew how to design those systems. I didn't realize that this work needed a trigger warning because it's not as easy as handing a system like you would in a workplace. I can't hand an Asana tool to homes without a lot of pain. And we'll
Yeah.
talk about what the pain is, why people don't even come to the table. But Ari, I'm here to tell you that when people do come to the table, fair play works. And the system I designed was based on this idea that the home is an organization. And when you look at it that way, there's pretty clear rules about how organizations thrive.
I love that. And it's resonating with me a lot because when you say like the communication or the I piece, like my husband and I are in couples therapy because I think you should always be working on things that are important to you. And my
Yes, of
relationship
course.
is important. And
And by the way, there you don't have to say that because
thank you.
that's by the way why it's so hard to even bring these tables. Because when you say something like "I am in couples therapy," everybody, including you, or is a brilliant communicator, feels like they have to justify why.
You're right.
You could just say "I'm in couples therapy."
Yeah, you are right. I thank you for saying that. I find in therapy, even my last session, I said to my partner, he was like, "Oh, well, I said I'm sorry." And I was like, "I don't ever want to hear you say I'm sorry again. I never want to hear those words because I'm sorry doesn't translate to any action. I just want to see it. All I want to see is the action." And so when you're saying that these bylaws or these rules come into place, like I think that is a huge mindset shift. I don't want to be the one responsible for telling you what I need done in the house because then I would rather just do it. It's much easier for me to just complete it by myself than to communicate for it to be done. But if you can take that responsibility and that action and that task as a whole, then it's helping. And I think that, yeah, that really just flips it for me, that switch of these bylaws. I'm going to take that home and use that.
Yeah, well, I think, again, why this is a 101 is because we're here to tell your listeners that it's complicated, right? These are
Yeah.
practices, right? I think the problem in a relationship is that people are, again, they're not looking at their homes as an organization. They're also not looking at their relationship as something that's a practice. And so one of my favorite social media surveys was asking people what their most important practice is. And it was ridiculous. People were saying like, burning sage, but what was so overwhelming and sad to me was that not one human in my survey said that communication was their most important practice.
Interesting.
I'm here to tell you that your most important practice is communication. And so if you say to me, "Oh, I exercised once in 2005 and so now I'm fit forever," then, we would think you're completely delusional, right? You don't say that to your doctor. So why is it that somebody would say to me, "Well, I tried a conversation about my home. My partner didn't do XYZ. I got loud, they got avoidant, and so now it's just much easier if I just do it all," right? That is why we get a lot of, I hope there's a trigger warning on your work because it's very painful to people.
Yeah.
But I think if we could just refocus and just say one thing, I want to talk about the secret formula. So what is a successful organization, right? A successful organization is a place where you interact with others. So let's call that your home, where there is three things. There are boundaries, there are systems, and then there's communication. And so I think that we have to be practicing all three of those things at once. It doesn't mean they're always going to be working in conjunction with each other or well. But in your case, back to that communication, I think what I want to say about that is typically people can just jump to the system of fair play, what we've seen over 10 years, when they've worked on communication and their boundaries first. It's hard to come to a system and to say, I want to move from, and we'll talk about what the fair play system is. I want to move from me telling you everything you have to do, and for you saying to me, if you're so overwhelmed, just tell me what to do, to a place where you're anticipating needs.
Yeah.
It's hard to get there without first looking and assessing your communication style. So I just want to give your listeners 3 tips for that. If you're somebody that thinks, you could work on your communication, what I would ask you to work on is 1, to recognize your vulnerability.
Hmm.
And I say this as a mediator. This is what I do with my clients. So we need to recognize what your vulnerability is. And it's fun because I have a quiz in my book, but also we could just do it right here. What is your typical vulnerability? You can ask your partner and do a reverse newlywed game. What is my biggest vulnerability? When I asked Seth that, he would say that you sound like a nails on a chalkboard. Anytime you speak, your tone is so uninviting. And I would say to him, your vulnerability is you're avoidant. So like anytime we need to have a real conversation, all of a sudden, like you're sleeping or you're
Shut
gone or
down.
like I
Yeah.
can't find you. So know your vulnerability. Is it all or nothing? When you're in a fight, you say you never help. You're always,
Mm.
doing this, is it a verbal assassin where you say things really calm, but you say it, a lot of my friends do that in really mean tones. I'm so surprised that you're such a bad father. Like, how did that happen? I really thought you're going to be a better father. So, there's a lot of different ways that we can be verbal assassins. I think that's number one. Number two is recognize that most of the time we use that vulnerability. It's when we're giving feedback in the moment. This is the
Mm.
hardest part, right? You see the garbage liner is not back in. You see that you get a text from your partner, you know, do the kids need to eat lunch when it's 12 on a Saturday? And
Yeah.
you want to give this feedback in the moment. So that's number two. Recognize when you're about to give feedback in the moment. Try to shut that down.
Mm-hmm.
And number three is come up with a time when your emotion is low and your cognition is high. And that's typically a check in. And that's the thing that I think is lacking for a lot of us, taking the time to invest in our relationship by finding a consistent time every week to check in with our partner. And I'd say that of everything in the Fair Play system, that's probably been the most effective tool that
Mm-hmm.
Seth and I have ever implemented. And that's the idea of this weekly check in when emotion is low and cognition is high.
Smart. Very smart. I love that. Um, I struggle a lot, I think, with the mental load and invisible load. So when I was looking at your Fair Play stuff and thinking about tasks as a whole, and especially in the past few months, like I've often, like groceries, for instance, my partner's big thing was, okay, well, why don't you just order the groceries online? Then it's something that's, not a big deal for you. And I'm like, no, like the planning part is the worst part. If all I have to do is go pick it up, like you make the order. It's the thinking behind. So I think I have a hard time verbalizing that and helping myself even understand that I'm not stressed about booking a doctor's appointment. I'm stressed about making the call, waiting on hold for 45
Yeah.
minutes, asking the right questions and knowing the right answers and knowing where the health card is and all these extra things. It's all the whole task. And so when we're having these communication times, when we're trying to talk about these things, and I liked your tip about, you know, when emotions are low and when you can actually think properly. But what are maybe some other tips that you have or tricks to actually have those conversations in a productive way with our partners or our support systems to navigate the mental or invisible load and all of the parts of a task?
So I think it's important to understand what fair play the system is. So I just gave you the fact that you'll know that if you tell me that you're not a couple that consistently checks in when emotion is low and cognition is high, I would say to you, you're not ready for the fair play system. But when you are ready, it's life changing.
Okay.
We now know that we have proof, we have evidence, we have a quantitative study that's coming out showing that fair play works. Not only with execution, but we'll talk about what the cognitive labor, what it does for cognitive labor.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll explain. So again, a successful organization has boundary systems communication. I gave you sort of the assessment of your communication style. If this is not something that you're regularly practicing, that's where you're going to want to start.
Mm-hmm.
But also, even while you start to learn to communicate, it's helpful to know that there is relief. There is relief for cognitive labor, and it happens in the fair play system. So, what does that mean? Well, the fair play system recognizes that cognitive labor, like you just said, is the hardest type of labor, and the way it does that is because of how we designed the system. So, I think it's important to explain how we designed the system because you'll see where I was stuck with my data. So, Fair Play didn't just start as a system. Fair Play started with after that blueberries text, I started to do my research. I put my researcher hat on like I love to do, and I tried to figure out what was happening to me. Not only did I find out that women shoulder 2/3 or more of what it takes to run a home and family, but what I found out was that this is the same shit, different decade. We've heard this before. This routine, this circus has been around for a long time, and it's been called the mental load. It's been called cognitive labor. It's been called invisible work. And that was my favorite term. It was coined in 1986 by a sociologist named Arlene Kaplan Daniels. And what I loved about that term was that she argued that it's very important to keep women's work invisible because it's actually the social safety net for most developed countries. And if we make it visible, it'll have to be valued, and then societies would collapse. So I decided, okay, I was very naive, and I thought, this is when I was heard, if you're so overwhelmed, just make a list, that I would start to ask women. This was in 2011, right after my blueberries breakdown. What is invisible to your partner that you're doing that may take more than 2 minutes? So it was the first time in, at that point, 3 years of parenthood and 10 years of marriage that I didn't feel alone, because this is before social media and podcasts, but we did have, early Facebook, and I was able to get over 9 months, the most unbelievable answers from women about what they were doing. And I didn't feel alone. I felt supported by these women. I felt united in getting this data. I opened up a giant Excel sheet and I named it the Shit I Do spreadsheet. And it was supposed to be just a list that went to Seth, and that was going to illuminate our house. But it turned into this 9-month project because I kept getting more and more data, and then I couldn't stop. And ultimately, it was 98 tabs at the bottom of an Excel sheet, and the most granular data you can get, which is what turned into the Fair Play system. So you can be really rest assured that I didn't leave anything out. Some people may yell at me by saying, why is cleaning a whole card? But I say, well, you also have dishes, dry cleaning, other cards, but nothing's left out. I will say that in collecting the Shit I Do spreadsheet and getting this 9 months of data, what I was able to do with that, and it was funny, it was things like, oh, I see, back to your point around medical and healthy living, I see you have an Excel tab called medical and healthy living. And on, line 17 of the Excel spreadsheet, Eve, you wrote application of sunscreen, 2 minutes. But you forgot the 30 minutes for the chase. And so I'd write down, oh yeah, 30 minutes for the chase. Eve, I see you have a tab here called extracurricular and non-sports. I noticed you didn't put Girl Scout cookies ordering and sales. So I'd say, okay, I'll add Girl Scout cookies ordering and sales. So it got very, very granular.
Yeah.
Very quick. But the problem was when I asked couples, that was my next step, who handles which part of the labor, what tabs on the Excel sheet, I got into what I call the both trap, where couples were saying we both do it. But I knew that wasn't at all representative of what women were telling me, how they felt, how burnt out they felt. And so I was saying, what's happening here? Like, you both handle groceries, you both take your kids to school, you both do medical. Like, that doesn't add up. So what I had to do was change the question. And once I changed the question, I had a major research breakthrough that is the basis of the Fair Play system. I changed the question to, how does mustard get in your refrigerator? And that was a beautiful question because I asked it in 17 countries, because you can change the condiment based on the country. And what I heard was, and what was shocking to me was that whether it was mainland China or Japan or Nordic countries or America or Canada or South America, it was the same. It was the same. Women told me that they are the ones who notice that their second son, Johnny, needs yellow mustard with his protein. Otherwise, he chokes. He won't eat protein. Women were the ones, that's what I call conception from the project management framework. Then women were also in charge of what I call planning. They were the ones who got stakeholder buy-in for what people needed from the grocery list. And they were also the ones who monitored the mustard for when it ran low. And then the reason why the couples were saying both was because men, and I focused on the hetero cisgender relationship because that's where a lot of our problems are coming from. Men were involved in groceries because they were going to the store, right? And they were bringing home spicy Dijon every fucking time when I asked for yellow mustard. And do you not know your kid? Are you fucking blind? Like, what is wrong with you? Why can't you do anything? Eve, you want me to trust my partner with my living will? The dude can't even bring home the right type of mustard. So What it told me was that the presenting problem is not the real problem, which is as a mediator, we're always looking for the real problem, not the presenting problem. The presenting problem is not that someone is so overwhelmed that they can't communicate with their partner or their partner can't even get the right type of mustard. What women were saying to me that was the actual problem was that their home organization has lost accountability and trust. And if you're not going to have a system that restores accountability and trust, then you're not going to be able to solve the cognitive labor.
Yeah.
And so that is what the fair play system is. It is a system of ownership, not equality. I don't care how many cards somebody holds. There is a card deck of 100 cards. And when you're holding a card, whether it's for one day, you do one meal, or it's forever, like I like to hold the VIP gifts card. I like to buy gifts for people. So I hold that card forever. I don't redeal that card. But we redeal taking care of kids to school all the time. We redeal meals all the time. We redeal dishes all the time. And so when you're holding a card, you hold it with full conception, planning, and execution. That is it. It's a very, very easy system. Even my Aunt Marion's Mahjong group uses it, right? You don't bring snack twice to that group with full ownership. You're out. So if Aunt Marion's Mahjong group can do it, why can't we?
Yeah.
You know why? Because in the formula for a successful organization, I said there's 3 parts, not 2. If it was just systems and communication, we would be fine. But the problem is a successful organization already needs boundaries, systems, and communication. And it's the boundaries, which is why this work needs the trigger warning.
It's so interesting to me because when you're saying these things, I'm thinking of legitimate conversations I've had within the last week that are the exact same that you're saying, and that become frustrating, that become like, how can I fix this? What can I do? And I think we are a little bit stuck in I am at least, how to have those conversations without starting an argument. Like I was having a conversation with my husband last year, probably, where I brought up the term default parent because I'd been really thinking like, these are the things that I'm doing. I had just started going back to work. I had felt like I have too much on my plate and there's no chance that I can get it all done in a day and I need help. And he got so upset, and it took a while for us to really talk this through, for him to understand and for me to communicate my feelings. Like it's not one-sided, it's both of us, and to resolve the argument before we could actually move forward with the conversation. And so for people who want to have these conversations with their spouse or their partner, how can they have a constructive conversation without it turning into an argument?
Well, sadly, it requires, like I said, the boundary systems communication. So it actually requires a lot of work on ourselves.
A lot.
A lot of work. And I will say that the quiz I give to people is what is the message that you use the most? And I'll give it to you. There's 4 messages that allow us to breach our boundaries, which is why these conversations don't happen or become so difficult. And again, I'm never blaming women, but typically the oppressed are the ones who have to make the change. Sadly, it works that way. You know, you think that you're going to just have Walmart raise their wages. It doesn't work that way, right? You have to unionize to get wages raised. So typically it's the people who are feeling the oppressed symptoms that have to do the initial work. The system is perceived fair work on both sides. Once you're in the system, then no, you're not doing all the work. You have your system in place to redeal, to have your check-ins, but to come to the table, the oppressed has to come to the table. And what we have to come to the table with is being able to ask for what we need. But it's really hard to ask for what we need unless we are able to hold a boundary. So what I would ask you is, there are 4 boundary breaching things, and then I'll assess what that means.
Okay.
So number 1 is my partner makes more money than me. That's number 1. And so their time is, more valuable. They contribute something else to the home.
Okay.
Number 2 is I'm a better multitasker. I'm wired differently to hear the child cry or to notice things. Number 3 is, in the time it would take me to tell him, her, they what to do, it's just easier for me to do it myself. Or 4, we're both colorectal surgeons, but my partner is really better at focusing on one task at a time where I can find the time. What would you
I would
say is
say
yours?
2, 3, and 4.
Okay, that's good to know, right? I
Yeah.
would say for me, it was 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Okay.
Um, so for people who have multiple, let's just
Yeah.
go there. Then what the assessment is showing us is that those are very valid messages for living in a unfair world.
Yeah.
They're coping mechanisms for living in an unfair world because otherwise, having to admit the assumptions of this marriage don't favor my mental and physical health or my time is very, very painful, especially for the person that's supposed to love us the most. And
Yeah.
so instead, we have to make up our own toxic time messages for ourselves to cope with living in that type of patriarchal system. And
Mhm.
so I get it. But the way we break it is doing some internal work. And the internal work is really understanding that all of the messages we just said are the ones that you and I identify with have to do with the fact that it's society has told us to prioritize men's time. Men's time is diamonds, it's finite. Women's time is infinite, it's sand. And if you don't believe me, right, you just have to look at health systems in the US. As of last year, they still were saying breastfeeding is free, even though it's an 1,800-hour a year job for women.
Yeah.
If you don't believe me, you just have to watch something called occupational segregation. So when women enter male professions, the salaries automatically go down. Women do 2/3 or more of all the chore work, the unpaid labor in their homes growing up, if there's a brother around.
Mhm.
So we're told since birth that our time is less valuable. And so to break that cycle, what we have to do is really restore a boundary that all time is created equal. So how did it work for me? Well, again, this is why this work requires a trigger warning, and this is a 101. You're not going to do this all in a day, but I think just knowing about this is
Mhm.
very helpful. There's a very different way that you come to the table. If you're coming to the table saying, I need you to load the dishwasher versus Seth, this is mine. In the time I've noticed that you have 3 hours after our kids go to bed to check Sports Center, finish a PowerPoint deck, and go to sleep 2 hours earlier than I do. When my head hits the pillow, I've been doing things in service of the home, literally till my head hits the pillow 2 hours after you go to bed. And I'm not going to live that way anymore. And when your mind is made up, the fear goes away because I was not willing to live that way anymore. I was willing to do the court ordered custody. You have to believe that it's not in your power, in your interest to live this way anymore. And typically, fair play has become a love letter to men
Mm.
because, and obviously, thank God we're not talking about abuse situations here, but I do not know any man who has said to me, again, unless that person should not have been with that person, I don't want to make this relationship feel more fair.
Yeah.
I just don't see it.
Yeah.
If a person is completely unwilling to sit down to work on communication, to work on perceived fairness in the relationship, to work on helping you hold your own boundaries, then there are deeper underlying issues in the
Mhm.
relationship. And typically, we find over 10 years, the least stable marriage in our cohorts are the relationship where a man is the outside earner and a woman is a stay at home partner.
Mm.
Because eventually, the stay at home partner is loses power, loses agency, um, has a lot of resentment, and the relationship shifts.
Yeah, for sure. It's all very interesting for me to reflect on and to understand, and like the communication that does have to happen, but also the boundaries. And I think those are all such good take homes for understanding fair play and even just the work that needs to be done before implementing. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk to you about unicorn space and self care because this podcast, the title of it is Your Cup of
Yes.
Joy. And that's because I just feel like I have this mission to debunk the myth that self-care is selfish. And it's something that I believed for so long and even sometimes still find myself believing. And so I just really want to change that perspective for people. So maybe you can start telling us a little bit about Unicorn Space, why the name, how it came to be. Give us a little quick
Yes.
background.
Well, what I love about the unicorn space is that it's not a completely different concept to what we're talking about here. It's just a different entry point.
Mm.
So a lot of women were saying to me, well, I have sort of, one woman said this to me really early on and it stuck with me. You know, I've lost my permission to be interesting.
Oh.
And it was very, very painful for her to say that. And I think what she was saying was basically to me, like, how could I have a boundary and ask for more help in the home? Because what am I freeing my time up for to do? And so that was very painful to hear. So what I was realizing was that women in our surveys, in our qualitative discussions, felt that they could and had permission to be three things. I call them the three Ps. Women could be partners, they could be parents, and they could be professionals. But let's say they wanted to start a podcast and they said to their partner, there is zero expectation for subscribers or money here. This is not part of my business. This is because I just want to do it for fun. There was a lot of guilt and shame around that. Whether you wanted to be an acrobat, whether you wanted to try to go back to piano, these things were seen as selfish. They were seen as, like you said, as sort of the top of the Maslow's hierarchy that nobody ever got to.
Yep.
And so a unicorn space is arguing that that's the bottom of your hierarchy, that there's actually only one way to fight a lifetime of burnout. And again, I wish it was easier. I wish I had the hack that says, you just have to take a freaking like creatine powder, but there's only one way to fight a life of overwhelm and burnout and boredom. And that is being consistently interested in your own life. That's it. It's hard, much easier said than done, but that is what was and is the best definition of mental health that I could find as I researched my second book. My kids often repeat it. They say to people, my mother has no interest in me being happy. And I say, well, you can't just say it like that because that gives zero context. But what they're saying is that they're repeating the definition of mental health that is in Unicorn Space, which is that to be mentally healthy, especially as a woman, we have to have appropriate emotions at appropriate times, yet we have to have the ability and strength to weather them. And so often for women, if we just went through the whole first part of our discussion, in the fair play discussion that we just had, if you had to say, what is your emotions when you're listening to this conversation, or picturing having to have a conversation with your partner about this, or being disappointed when the thing didn't get done, often they are not great emotions. They're rage, resentment, a lot more rage, a lot more resentment, sadness. Those are appropriate emotions. And often women are having them at appropriate times. It's just the third piece that I want to highlight. It's appropriate emotions at appropriate times, but it's how do you weather them?
Yeah.
And so often what women have been doing, and especially in our research, which is sort of tracks the population, is they've been doing what we call hedonic pursuits. So doom scrolling at night, watching 10 hours of Netflix a day, not a day, like a week, relying on mommy juice and making it a joke. We have a subset of women who tell us that they just take edibles literally through Friday night to TGIM till thank God it's Monday morning, just to get through just how mundane and hard it is to caregive on weekends.
Yeah.
And so instead, Unicorn Space is the antidote. It is not hedonic well-being. It's what we call eudaimonic well-being. It allows you to have endorphins and dopamine and these long-term feel-good chemicals that don't wash away the second the edible metabolizes or the mommy juice is gone. And so typically a unicorn space is, like I said, it's mythical, it's magical, it's like a unicorn, but it doesn't exist. It's a space that doesn't exist because we think it's selfish. So But if you believe that it really is the third prong in what mental health is, you'll realize it's not optional. It's actually the core of your Maslow's hierarchy. It's the first thing that you need to invest in. And that is, how do you weather difficult emotions? We weather difficult emotions by having, I can't believe I just did that experiences.
Yeah.
So this podcast is a unicorn space, right? It has all the recipe of it, the elements. One, curiosity. I wonder if I could change the paradigm of how people look at self-care. Two, shit, if I'm going to do that, that means I have to share myself with the world. I have to connect with others. I have to find guests. And three is the hardest part for a lot of women, which I was surprised by. I always thought curiosity would be the hardest part, but it's actually the third C. So curiosity and connection were doable, but the hardest C was completion. Not realizing that it has to be perfection. And so it requires all three of those things to have an I can't believe I just did that moment, whether it's uploading your first episode or having a subscriber or listener come to you and say something that was like you changed their lives. Those are the moments. And that's what Unicorn Space is. It's really a recipe for an antidote to burnout.
It's incredible. And it's very, very true. Like, it resonates so much with me, especially right now. I was just talking to somebody in my office today about how I completely lost myself. I had kids very close together. I had twins, and then 18 months later, I had my third. During the pandemic, I was career driven before, and then I felt like, because I wanted to have kids my whole life, that I had to be this perfect mom. And if I wasn't dedicating 100% of myself to my kids, then I wasn't a good mom, to the point where if I had to pee, I would hold my pee because my kids needed to be held until somebody came home and could hold the kids so I could go pee. Like, absolutely ridiculous and so very unhealthy. And I was at the lowest point of my life when I really realized, like, who am I?
Right.
Besides a mom? What do I like to do besides have two children on my boobs at all times? Like, I don't like that. I just feel like I have to do that. And I realized there's no badge of honor for doing it all by yourself. There's no one saying, like, oh, you're the best mom because you gave up yourself. People feel bad for you. You're destroying yourself.
Yes.
It's the exact opposite. And so,
and then you get the societal shame of people
yes,
saying things to you like, what do you do all day? Eat bonbons? I mean, this gets back to fair play.
literally.
I think that it's really important, Ari, to understand that if somebody tries to tell you to be interested in your own life, but they didn't have the first part of our conversation, not only is tone deaf, I find it dangerous.
Agreed.
Because it is just shaming and horrific to understand that there's a reason why women don't get a chance to be interested in their own lives. And that is and shame for it. It's because we're holding all the unpaid labor of the home.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why Unicorn Space had to be a follow-up, a sequel to Fair Play. Because I would never come out with a book that just tells people that they have to find a unicorn space without the context of understanding all the personal sharing that we just did and how this requires a trigger warning and how hard this is, just like you talked about. Because without normalizing the experience that we are literally fighting, giving away our time is what's prescribed of women. The amount of people who still get back to me and after a funeral and say, Eve, I just thought it was important to use a researcher to know that people are still saying the woman who died was selfless. I hope you know that and can track it for your data. We are praised for not having a self. That is the opposite of a unicorn space, which is what I'm saying is the bottom of your hierarchy is to prioritize being interested in your own life. And unfortunately, being interested in your own life through our data didn't come from just adult friendships, like a girls' weekend every year, and it didn't come from exercise. Those are important, of course. Those are our endorphins and self-care and health. But that's not where, sadly, the antidote to burnout was held. It was held in women who came back to me and said, I can't believe I just did that experience. And so we were trying to figure out, how do we dissect what is in this I can't believe I just did that experience? And like I said earlier, there was this commonality of those three C's. There was curiosity and I wonder component. There was this sharing yourself with the world component. And there was a completion component. And it can be as small as, I remember someone said, listen to Christina Tosi. She was created Milk Bar. And she talks about this in one of a podcast or something, that for her, the joy in baking didn't come from eating it herself, right? It came with the validation of the neighbor eating her baked goods. That was a completion point. So the problem is, I think that so many of us have conflated completion with perfection. That what's like, we say to ourselves, what's the point of starting a podcast if I'm never going to be in the top 100 of Apple Podcasts? What's the point of starting a podcast if I'm never going to, monetize it with sponsorships? What's the point of writing a book if I'm never going to get it published by a publisher? What's the point of art if I'm always going to suck at it? Right. So I think what I want to say is that the completion point is not perfection. It has to look different. And once that happens, I think, and you have those three components, then we start to see some really, really cool mental health outcomes for women.
It's amazing. And for someone who maybe feels stuck or feels like kind of how I was, like absolutely lost in who I was and was craving that creative piece, what's maybe like one small first step that they can take from this episode to find their creative spark again?
I guess we can end on this sort of fun tips or exercise, but the first thing I would say is, number one, close your eyes and just picture something that makes you excited or that you like to do. That's it. Not something you did as a child, not something that brings you shame, like I shouldn't be doing that. But I'll give it, and we'll do this as an example. So I had one woman, she was a single mother. And so we did this exercise, or I followed her through it. And for her, it was piano, playing piano. So that's the one thing I would say. And then there was another woman I did this exercise with. And for her, she was an actuary. She was an insurance actuary. And for her, it was rock climbing. So when you have that in your mind, what I would ask for you to do next is to, and again, we have this exercise in the book. There's a lot of free resources on Fair Play Policy that you can link to in the show notes, where we have stuff for women or anybody to do. But what I like to start with, if you're stuck, is to picture something you like to do. And then don't stop there. First, you say to yourself, why did I pick this? So let's talk about the actuary. She's like, well, I really like to rock climb. I'm sort of sitting at a desk all day and working on, client service. And so it's something for myself. And so that's where she stopped. And then this woman, I also asked her what her values were. And she told me her values were her friends, her family, and her health. So again, those are great, but sort of boring. So let's just put them aside. So what I asked her, which was the most important part of this exercise, was, okay, let's take it a level deeper. When you are rock climbing, what 5 values does that bring up for you? So I don't have them in front of me, but they were for sure 2 that I thought were really interesting were risk and freedom.
Oh.
And so what I would say, and there are 3 more because I like to have 5, is I don't give a shit about the values that everybody forces you to say, or that as women are part of our service to our roles. Yeah. Great. I'm glad that you value friendship and family and health. Again, important. Mm-hmm. What I'm interested in is that woman who wants to invest in freedom and risk. Who is she? And so what I said to her was like, you don't have to rock climb every week, but I want you to check in with yourself and say, did I get a chance to experience freedom this week? Did I get a chance to experience risk? So that's what, if you were stuck, I want you to explore your values, but not through the values the bingo card values that everybody's going to say. I want you to take something you like doing, ask yourself why you like doing it. And then I want you to come up with 5 values that it brings up for you. And then instead of asking whether you did that activity, did I get to cook this week? I want you to ask yourself if you got a chance to practice those values that week.
I love that.
That's where I like to start.
That's amazing and such a good tangible thing for people to be able to do to kind of get out of a funk if you're in one, or to
Yeah.
search for
Yes.
something that's really going to fulfill you, and to be an extension of something little like self-care, not playing that down, but something that's a little bit outside of the box to really relate it back to values. I
And
love
look,
that.
right, and where you're starting from, which I love, right, with your listeners is this, joy is not selfish. Pursuing joy is not selfish. Unicorn space isn't, I can't believe I just did that joy. It is a type of joy that stays with you in a way that I said, maybe a glass of wine or just cuddling up with your phone. Also, of course, we want you to have little dopamine hits throughout your day, but I'm asking you to invest in long-term joy,
Yeah.
which is hard. Part of it feels scary. There's fear in long-term joy. And I think people think joy is not supposed to have fear with it. But as you know, being a podcast host, everything that is getting your episodes edited and out the door and having to share that with the world, it is not easy. And so I see you and your unicorn space. And I think that I just hope that, again, whether you make $1 billion from it or nothing at all, that you see that there's inherent value in what you're doing.
Oh, thank you for saying that. That's so kind and loving. And what a good note to end on.
Yes,
Eve,
yes.
I normally end with some rapid fire questions just for fun. Is that okay with you?
I'd love it. Yes.
Okay, coffee or tea?
1,000,000% tea and
Oh,
iced. Yes.
amazing. Favorite TV show?
Back to unicorn space. I'm looking more eudaimonic, so I'll give you a book instead. I just finished God of the Woods. It's a really wonderful thriller.
Oh,
If people like
amazing.
thrillers. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sweet or salty?
1,000,000 here. You can look at my diet. It's all sweet. This was my third biscotti of the day, chocolate biscotti. So I'm halfway through that one.
Amazing. And go-to meal to cook?
I just back to another unicorn space. Here's the beautiful thing about a unicorn space. When you understand the value of doing something for curiosity, connection, and completion, sometimes you get greedy and you want to do more. So one of mine this year is learning to cook, because I've actually never held a knife before. And that was what I realized was holding me back. It wasn't even just perfection of the meal. It was the fact that I was afraid I was going to chop off my finger. So I just finished in my 10-week Learn to Cook series. It's really hard to carve time out for it, but I'm doing it. I'm in class number 4. And I will say my favorite thing to make so far was the perfect over hard fried egg with some really good shaved cheddar cheese and just a good English muffin. So it sounds super basic, but it was like a classic egg McMuffin. It was one of my favorite new first things to make.
I love it. Good for you. And how cool to see the application of your own book in your own life. That's amazing.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Eve. Where can people find you and connect with you?
So please, like I said, we have a lot of resources. If any of this resonated with you, at fairplaypolicy.org. We are a 501c3. If you want a copy of the book, the cards, and it's cost prohibitive for you, we are happy to send it to you. We are here for you as a community. We want you to succeed and be interested in your own life. And then, of course, Fair Play Life, and then my own Instagram. People can find me sort of politically ranting about the United States if you want to follow my personal account too.
Amazing. And we'll put all those resources in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Your Cup of Joy. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. And if this episode resonated with you, or if you've been loving this show, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you are listening. Your support helps the podcast grow, it helps it reach more people, and it means the absolute world to me. So keep filling your cup with joy, and I will see you next week.